Welcome to the Church Vibes Podcast with Jordan and Maddie, the podcast where we talk about all things Christian, all things culture, and all things Christian culture. This is a space where we love having tough conversations. It's our hope that whether you're a dedicated follower of Christ, you've never stepped foot in a church or opened a Bible in your life, or you're anywhere in between, you'll be able to learn something new, think about something differently, or be encouraged in some small way. Now, on to the show.
What's up, you guys? Jordan here.
Grace and peace, everybody. It's Maddie, and welcome to episode 5 of the Church Vibes Podcast.
Episode 5. Let's jump into it. I'm super excited this week.
Yes, you should be excited this week because episode 5 is a pretty special one because we have our first guest. My younger brother Tom is here with us.
What's up, guys? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you on. Tom's a college student, he's a drummer, and he's actually a real music aficionado, so we thought he'd be perfect to have on for this particular episode because for our main topic later on, we're going to be discussing the good, the bad, and the ugly of Christian music. So we thought he would be a perfect guest for this episode.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be so good. And so before we get into that, we want to start things off a little differently than how we normally do because we have a guest. And so we want to do a lightning round to help you guys get to know Tom a little bit better. All right, let's jump into it. Maddie, what is the first question?
All right, what is your favorite Bible verse or Bible passage?
Great question. I would say for me, my favorite Bible verse is Hebrews 6:19. It's the reason I have an anchor tattooed on my shoulder. So yeah, Hebrews 6:19 for sure.
Cool. What about favorite Christian song?
And I had 3 that I was really torn between on. One by Lecrae and one by KB. But I think my favorite Christian song would be Uncomfortable by Andy Mineo. It really dives into some deep topics and has some phenomenal lyrics.
Oh, that's so good. That's one of my favorite songs too, and artists. So moving on from that, what is a biblical figure other than Jesus that inspires you?
Other than Jesus, I would have to say the disciple Thomas, just because I'm a skeptic of life. He was a skeptic of life. But when he finally was convinced that he knew the truth, he did everything in his power to share the gospel with the world. And that's really inspirational to me. I'm also named after him, so that helps.
That does help. So, okay. Not quite as deep, but important nonetheless. What is your favorite ice cream flavor?
I think this is a pretty deep question, in my opinion. I think it's a pretty important question. So when I was young, it used to be cookie dough, but as I've matured and become more of a young adult, I'd have to say mint chip. I apologize to my sister Jessica.
Okay.
I know she hates mint, but yes, mint chip for sure.
Nice.
Mint chip.
I'm a mint chip fan as well. What is one book besides the Bible that has changed your life in some way?
Okay, so this is kind of a curveball to you two, but the book that has probably changed my life the most is the Book of Mormon. So hear me out.
Canceled.
Okay. You're going to have to explain this one
I have
well.
to say it's the Book of Mormon because in the last few years, I've done some quote unquote like apologetics research on my own just for fun. It's kind of a hobby of mine. And so the Book of Mormon obviously is the book that was transcribed by Joseph Smith in 1830. So, and defending the Protestant church against the LDS church, I started reading it more. And so, yeah, I would have to say the Book of Mormon. It's a random answer, but it's true.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's actually really cool, yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, what's one place you want to see before you die?
There's so many different places that I want to go to, but if I had to pick one, I would say Florence, Italy. It's kind of a long story as to why, but basically I'm a huge history nerd and I love the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, and Florence, Italy played a huge role in that, and I've just heard so many great things about the city, so Florence definitely for sure. With Japan right at a close second.
Ooh, Japan's a big one for me.
Yeah.
Now, one movie that you could never get tired of. And this is big for Tom because being his sister, I know that he's not a big rewatcher of movies like I am.
I
So
am not.
what's a
Gross,
movie
man.
that you could never get tired of, that you could definitely rewatch?
So I got to give a shout out to Jordan's wife Isabel on this one, because the movie that I do not get tired of is the Lord of the Rings: Fellowship of the Ring. It is probably my favorite movie ever. I've watched it probably about 30 times. The entire movie is amazing. I quote it probably on the daily in the house. And yeah, I could never get tired of it.
Okay.
I love it so much.
Yeah, that's quite. I sometimes struggle to get through them just because they're so long, but I do love them. Perhaps not on the same level as you guys.
Yeah.
But okay, what about this? I love this one. What's one unpopular opinion that you have?
So anyone that knows me knows that my entire life is filled with unpopular opinions. Basically,
Accurate.
Maddie can testify to that. Pretty much every day, my life is an unpopular opinion. But if I had to just pick one, I think what I would say is I think pizza is probably the most overrated food. I think it's good. Don't get me wrong. But when people say, "Oh, pizza's my favorite food," like I think that's just super cliche, because I can think of probably about 40 different foods that I think taste better. So yeah, I would say pizza's quite an overrated food, though it is
Yeah.
quite good.
Totally agree.
That's a hard one.
I totally agree with you on that one, Tom.
I think pizza's really good, but when people, it's just so cliche and basic, and to just say that it's your favorite food, like, come on, why don't we get something like a gyro, or like, I don't know, maybe some chow mein or something.
Chow mein. Tom's obsessed with chow mein.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Now, Tom, who is your role model other than your older sister, Maddie, who you look up to and adore so much? Who's your
God.
role model?
Well, outside of my sister, you know, thinking about this one, there's actually a few I could have picked from, but the one I would have to say, since I am a drummer, I have to say Travis Barker. Travis Barker is the drummer for pop punk band Blink 182. But the thing that's most inspirational to me is his work ethic. Not a lot of people, you may or may not know him, but in the drumming community, people really are inspired by the work ethic that he has, and how he's 44 years old, but he drums like he's a 19 or 20-year-old. And it's really just incredible how well he keeps his body in shape, how he keeps his diet. He's most definitely one of my biggest role models for sure.
I see that. He's definitely he's one to grind. I've seen him. He's been in so many different like features in so many different bands and artists. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, from Blink 182 and Machine Gun Kelly. I mean, so many different things.
Well, all over, man. But okay, final question, and you got to answer this right. Okay, what is your favorite podcast that you listen to?
So I won't say the Church Vibes podcast.
You can say that. It's okay.
I'll go outside the box.
I said you got to
here.
answer it right. But no, it's okay. What are some of your favorites?
I would say the number one podcast I listen to. I know it's basic, just like saying pizza is your favorite food. I know it's basic, but I listen to the Joe Rogan Experience probably on the daily, at least a few times a week.
Nice.
I love listening to his clips, all of the different people he has on the show, from alien hunters to musical artists to politicians. I love listening to the show and his unique opinions and takes on different things. So yeah, I know it's basic, but Joe Rogan for sure.
It's good though. He's legit.
I love him so much.
Now, Tom, is there anything else that you think is important for the listeners of the Church Vibes podcast to know about you, to get to know you as we go into this episode?
Well, I think what everybody needs to know about me is I am the greatest nacho chef to ever exist, and it's not even close. I am a Nacho Chef Extraordinaire, as my sister calls me. And yes, I can make the meanest plate of nachos on the planet.
I see that. I'll have to add to that because I've had your popcorn too.
Yes.
You make a pretty mean bowl of popcorn.
I do make a pretty.
Which-
I have some secret little tricks I have that I can't release on the podcast. But
I was gonna say, like, it's such a basic item, but you there's something about it.
I make it a little spicy, a little tangy. It's good.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for participating in that lightning round there, and you were the first one to go through that, other than your lovely hosts here. But Maddie, as you guys know, it's time to go into some news. Maddie, what do we have this week? What's cracking? What's happening?
What's going on this week? Well, we have an asteroid.
An asteroid.
Yes,
Okay.
we have an asteroid headed toward Earth. According to NASA, an asteroid is currently on a trajectory to hit Earth on November 2nd, 2020. But before you start charging everything on credit or selling all of your belongings, it is important to note that the asteroid is less than 7 feet in size and will probably disintegrate before actually hitting the Earth. But doesn't this just seem like one more thing to add to the list of 2020?
Seriously. So first of all, I feel a little clickbaited. I was expecting a very large asteroid, but it's okay. But seriously, 2020, we need to calm down. Like, I'm running out of fingers to count all the crazy stuff that has happened. We've got murder hornets. We've got coronavirus. We've got like celebrities dying. Like, all this. We just need to stop. Just stop. Don't pass go. Don't collect $200. Like, I actually saw a meme that they were like, it was 2020 or it was 2021. They're like, what's the first rule of 2021? And they're like, we don't talk about 2020. It's like Fight Club. Like, that's the first rule. We don't talk about it. And that's where we're headed, I think. But again, like you said, it's 7 feet in size, so it's apparently not dangerous. But I find it funny that it's like literally supposed to hit the day before elections.
Must be an omen.
And I feel like it's either the asteroid that destroys us on election day, or it's the people on election day. I'm not looking forward to that. That's probably another episode, but man, it's been quite the year.
I feel like this is just like a conspiracy theorist dream. They're like, oh, the asteroid's going to hit us and it's going to be before the election. And then they're going to one world order. And, that's what I feel like we're coming for next.
Well,
they just
obviously,
have so
George
much ammo.
Soros and Hillary Clinton planted the asteroid in space, Tom. So
Obviously, this is all Hillary Clinton's plan.
And embedded on the asteroid is actually the cure to the coronavirus.
For me, the biggest takeaway from this whole asteroid thing is the importance of actually reading articles and not just reading
Truth.
headlines. Because the headlines of all of these articles are like, asteroid headed toward Earth, asteroid destroying Earth before the election. And then you actually read any of the articles and you see that there's only about a 0.41% chance of the asteroid even coming into collision with Earth. And if it does, the asteroid is so small that it would either disintegrate before hitting the Earth, or it would just make virtually no impact. It would just land on the ground somewhere. And really, this whole situation is just adding fuel to the apocalyptic fire. We're all out here thinking everything's the end of the world. And then we see an article like this about this asteroid heading toward the Earth. And it really is just, it's one more thing. It's fuel to the fire. And speaking of adding fuel to the fire, let's talk about somebody who seemingly just loves to do that.
Oh, man.
Our buddy, our pal, Junior the Asparagus, Jerry Falwell Jr.
I'm sorry. I can't go on. You can't just throw Junior the Asparagus off on the side like that.
Well, that's what we called him last time. So that's his name on the Church Vibes podcast now.
It's true. That's the official name. But what's going on with that, Maddie?
So a few weeks ago, we spoke about Jerry Falwell Jr. taking an indefinite leave of absence as president of Liberty University. Well, that indefinite leave has now become definite because Jerry Falwell Jr. has resigned after new allegations of sexual impropriety have come to light. Now, as we go into the discussion of this, I do want to say for any of you who are listening with your kids, fast forward about 10 minutes or 5 to 10 minutes after this section because we will be speaking a little bit about some of the details of this allegations that are out against him, and they may not be things that you want your children to hear. So if there are any little ears in proximity of where you are, tell your kids to leave or fast forward a little bit.
This is a church vibes trigger warning for everybody.
Yes. But so I'm going to jump into it, I guess. So I was reading the article, and he is really suffering. He quit with a full $10.5 million severance package.
Wow.
And
Poverty.
first of all, man, can I quit a job and get 10 million severance? I'm good with that. But what really bothers me is he refused still to admit any wrongdoing. We kind of talked about this last week about, when leaders fall. It's kind of appalling to me that in all of this, even with new allegations come out, he's just like, oh, I'm not going to admit to anything. I'm just going to take my money and run. Seriously?
Yeah, it's really ridiculous, especially because the allegations that are coming out against him are pretty bizarre and they're pretty weird.
Yeah.
He pretty much, like you said, hasn't taken any responsibility for anything that he's done. He actually tried to put all of the responsibility onto his wife. Remember, those of you who listened, we talked a little bit about some weird stuff going on with the pool boy. Well, that's coming back into light. And apparently, Junior the Asparagus is saying that his wife had an affair with the pool boy, and that's what forced him into this state of depression and forced him into having these bad thoughts and doing bad things. And it was really all of his wife's fault for sleeping with the pool boy. But really, if you listen to what the pool boy is saying, and obviously we weren't there, we don't know what really happened, but according to the pool boy, there was some stuff going on, we'll just say, that involved all three consenting
goodness.
parties,
Oh,
the
boy.
wife, Jerry Falwell Jr.,
Wow.
and the pool boy. So there's some really gross, kind of weird stuff going on there. And
Yeah.
I really didn't think that it could get any worse, but it seems like it's continuing to do so. And if this is what's coming out on our end, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a lot more disturbing stuff that is
For sure.
being withheld.
If I might say, first of all, and I'm sorry, I have to make a little light of it. Of all stereotypes, why the pool boy, fam?
It's like a movie. It really is. It's like a movie.
It's like a movie. And I also hope that I'm assuming the pool boy's young, that I hope that he receives some type of tuition assistance as well. I'm sorry, did I say that?
Yikes.
But wow, I don't even know what to say about that. In my reading about that, I must have just glossed over it and did not realize that it was all three of them having a Bible study. That's wow. And that goes back to the fact of him not admitting anything, and for him to be like, well, I did all this because my wife did that. What type of elementary answer is that?
Yeah, for me, it's just so, this situation's so off-putting, especially for the university in general. I know Jordan talked about
Right.
this, what was it, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? And he was saying about, considering going to get his master's degree at Liberty, but now if that would probably never happen, And that's kind of
Yeah.
how I feel, in this stage of my life. I'm looking at colleges to transfer to, and Liberty has come up on my mind once or twice. But after all of this stuff with Junior the Asparagus, I just feel like personally I would never want to go to a school where this kind of behavior was allowed at some point. So it's really just disappointing.
Yeah.
It really is. It's very disappointing. And, I brought this up last time and I'll bring it up again. we all really need to pray for Jerry Falwell Jr., pray for his wife,
Yeah.
pray for the school,
Yeah.
pray for the board that's having to make these decisions. You know, I feel very bad for Jerry Falwell Jr. Not because I think he's any sort of victim, but because I feel bad for anybody that has fallen into sin and can't get out. So, you know, I think it's really important that
For sure,
we pray
yeah.
for him, and we pray that he'll be able to have restoration with God and restoration with his fellow man. And that really takes us right into our next topic, because we're actually talking about a brand new album that just came out that's actually entitled Restoration.
That's quite the transition there. I like that, Maddie.
That's a uber
Um,
specific transition there. But Grammy Award winning Christian rapper and hip hop artist Lecrae just dropped a brand new album entitled Restoration, which includes popular singles like Zombie, Set Me Free, and Drown. The album has been really well received and has been met with positive reviews, but this album may actually be Lecrae's last, as he's mentioned that he is seriously considering retiring from music.
So this was Lecrae's ninth solo studio album, and definitely was one of my personal favorites. What this album, Restoration, talks about is Lecrae's background and his testimony. So his testimony is full of trauma, drugs, abuse, being neglected as a child, being molested. And this album talks about how he had to deal with his mental health as an adult, especially in the years 2018 and 2019. So the best songs that wrap up this album and really show the true purpose of it are Zombie, the intro track Restore Me, and then my personal favorite, the outro track Nothing Left to Hide. I think if you were just to pick these three songs to listen to, I think that this would really show the true message behind the album. And just on a personal note, this was probably Lecrae's best album since probably Anomaly in 2014. I think the message was very clear and direct, and I thought the production was great, and I think the best part of all was the lyrics, especially on the three songs that I just mentioned.
Yeah, all those tracks are really great. I think just in general, Lecrae is a really phenomenal writer. I mean, he's an incredible lyricist. He is
Oh
able
yeah.
to, you know, I guess you could say he's a wordsmith. He really is able to take these deep messages and put them into these formats that are somehow so artistic, but yet in another sense so approachable. And he's really had an incredible career. I mean, I would say he was really the catalyst for this resurgence of the Christian hip hop movement.
Yeah, man, this is crazy. You know, like in the interview, he said it's of course, he's considering retiring, and he said he might do one last church close mixtape, and then what I love, he said, and then it'll be time to allow quote unquote the new blood to come up. Like, and I love that. I love that he's choosing to end strong rather than fizzling out.
Yeah, he's really
But I don't. Yeah.
he's really trying to end on a good note here, because this album was just, for me, it was just out of the park.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. You know, my favorite track I think was Over the Top.
Oh yeah.
That one's crazy. I mean, the whole thing is really, really good, but that was probably the one I kept going back to. It was super good.
Yeah, I've been listening to Over the Top while I've been working out, and so
Yep.
I'll have that going on. So on last Monday, I was deadlifting, and I had that going up, and I was just kind of feeling myself, just getting a little hyped in the gym, and I just love that song so much.
You know, and that really has me wondering who is going to be the next Lecrae. He said again he wants to allow the new blood to come up, so I'm just super excited to see who that new blood's going to be.
Oh yeah, I'm so excited to see who in the next 5 to 10 years will come into that spotlight that Lecrae has been for the past 10 or so years.
Yeah, I mean, it's really exciting. I think that Christian music in general is really shifting and changing, and I can really sense there's some good things going on there. And I'm excited about that because I think that Christian music is such a central part of the Christian experience more than it is to any other religion. Music is really at the heart of our faith tradition. And because of that, there are a lot of disagreements on how we should think about music, how we should consume music, how we should play music. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
for the main topic in this episode, we really want to dive deep into the good, the bad, and the ugly of Christian music. What is it? Why is it? And all that jazz. We'll talk about our personal experiences with Christian music. We'll talk about the good, the bad, and we'll really talk about how we can practically make things better for the future. So, why don't we start by talking about our personal experiences with Christian music?
For sure. Well, I'll just jump in. As I've said and I've shared in the podcast before, I got saved. I started going to church in high school, and so that's really when I started listening. And at first, it was pretty much run of the mill stuff like regular CCM, and worship music. But then I got really heavy into the Christian rap and the Christian metal scenes, which comes at no surprise, I'm sure. Um, but some of my favorites would be, in terms of rap, Andy Mineo and NF
Mm.
and Lecrae
Oh yeah.
are some big ones. Andy Mineo, I will say, is probably my number one favorite. I just, that's just how it is. But and then going into Christian metal, that's really been my focus. I've had Christian metal bands, and I'm just so into it. Bands like Sleeping Giant, For Today, Silent Planet, and the last one is going to come as a surprise, but they're called Impending Doom, and they're incredibly worshipful, and it sounds really funny. And I know Maddie's like, "Oh God," right now when I say that. I'm sure. Um, um, but yeah, and so, but I will say when it comes to worship, I love elevation worship is a big one. A lot of what Hillsong does, and Planet Shakers. I feel like they're underrated. They don't get out there a whole lot. I saw them at a Acquire the Fire when that was still a thing, and I just was hooked. But
Oh, I went to
it's
that
gonna
one year.
sound kind of like surprising probably to some of you, but my favorite Christian like CCM kind of band would be Rain Collective. Actually, I love them so much, and a lot of CCM these days doesn't really phase me, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But Rain Collective and the other ones I mentioned have really impacted and stuck with me. So I realize we have a guest, and I just stepped right ahead. I want to turn it back to you, Tom. What about you? What is your personal experience with Christian music?
So, my personal experience with Christian music started off when I was young, going to church. And on our way to church, oftentimes my mom would play gospel CDs in the car. So a lot of my childhood was like Kirk Franklin, uh, and
Nice.
it was a lot. It was very gospel based. My mom loves gospel music.
Mary,
Uh,
Mary.
Mary, oh yeah, and so that was definitely my first introduction to Christian music outside of church. But when I started really listening to Christian music on my own, the first few bands I would listen to was like the Afters and Stellar Cart. Uh,
Yes.
Nice.
Maddie knows that I used to listen to Stellar Cart a lot, especially the album Expect the Impossible. And then for the Afters, Never Going Back to OK. Maddie and I both love both of those albums and even still listen to
I
them
actually
to this
met the
day.
Afters.
Oh, did you?
Surprisingly enough, yeah, when they were still really small. I used to have an autographed CD somewhere. I have no idea where it is now, but I digress.
That's awesome. And as I got older, I got more into groups like DC Talk, one of my favorite all time groups from the '90s.
Our mom
And
loves
then
them.
yeah, and Switchfoot back in 2011 they dropped an album called Vice Verses, which is still to this day one of my favorite albums. It's probably impacted me the most in my life. John Foreman, especially with his beautiful lyrics and the amazing music on that album. But really, where my Christian music journey truly started was in 2014. My neighbors across the streets, shout out to the Broyle family, They were Christians too, and they were really into the Christian hip hop scene. And I had never really listened to Christian hip hop outside of DC Talk, but one day my neighbor was wearing a shirt that said 116 on it. And I asked him, I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "Look it up." I was like, just me being like a kid, I was like, okay. And so I went home and looked it up, and I saw that Lecrae had just dropped a new album called Anomaly. And I listened to it, and that's really where I truly fell in love with music. To this day, Anomaly by Lecrae is probably my favorite album of all time. I say probably as in it is my favorite album of all time. Every song is an absolute banger. The lyrics on it are amazing.
Such a good, yeah.
I love it so much. And that album was just a stepping stone to get me deeper and deeper into the Christian music scene. So like today, I still listen to Lecrae, like we just talked about. I love Jordan's favorite artist, Andy Mineo, KB, NF. Maddie and I both love this group, Social Club Misfits.
Oh man, I didn't even I should have added that in.
Oh man.
I love them too.
We listen to Social Club Misfits in the car a lot.
Oh yeah,
because
Maddie,
Tom and I, you'll learn about this when I talk about my experience with Christian music. Tom and I don't necessarily agree on most music, so there are like a select few artists that we'll listen to together.
Yeah, I introduced Maddie to the Social Club Misfits, and especially the more Latin type. Because one thing you got to know about Maddie, one thing you have to know is she is a sucker for Latin hip hop type music.
It's true.
And
spicy.
She's just a sucker for it. So sometimes she'll just play Gabriel Iglesias in the car, and I'll just have to deal with it. But I introduced her to Social Club Misfits.
Did you say Gabriel Iglesias?
Okay, Tom definitely means Enrique Iglesias.
Did I say
Enrique?
Oh, whoops.
Gabriel, he's the
Gabriel Iglesias is fluffy.
I mean, he can make good music too, I guess.
He probably could. I met Enrique Iglesias. My apologies. Basically the same guy. But and then finally, away from the hip hop scene, the band that Maddie and I both love is For King and Country.
Yes.
Oh man.
We both really just love For King and Country. Especially for me, they're both of the members in the group are drummers, so the drumming in their music is just incredible, and it's very the music is driven by the drums, really how I think music should be. So I think For King and Country is just a wonderful band too. So yeah,
I have to say, on that note, so I don't know if I've mentioned before, but my wife actually works for K-Love Radio. And so I'm a little bit spoiled because I get to see some really cool experiences. And one of them, every year for Christmas, it's like the most lit like Christmas banquet and concert. And last year, actually, K-Love flew out for King of Country just for a night for us. And they put on like a special concert just for the company. And dude, when they did Little Drummer Boy, where all of them are drumming, and it was one of the greatest performances I've seen. And I already love that song, but with them doing it, oh, so good.
I'm so jealous. Other than Owl City, which I'm not going to get into it because I'll just start talking for like 2 hours. Other than Owl City, For King and Country is probably the group that has had the biggest impact on me as a human being. And I think I would just completely freak out if I ever saw them live.
So Maddie, why don't we hear what your personal experiences are with Christian music? I'm looking forward to hearing this.
Yeah, so it's interesting because obviously Tom is my younger brother. He is a couple years younger than me, but our experiences with Christian music were actually very different. I actually never in my life listened to a secular radio station until I was maybe in 7th grade. So Christian music was all I listened to for my whole life. And then like movie soundtracks, which I mean, high key, that's really not that different from now.
Oh, man,
yeah, not really.
You're reminding me of being in the car with you and all you want to play is The Prince of Egypt.
Okay, do we
Okay,
need
that's
to
a banger,
go
though.
over why The Prince of Egypt is the best movie of all time? Because I'll do
that's
it
a
right
whole
now.
nother podcast, Maddie.
We'll shift the podcast, and this will be a podcast episode dedicated to why The
Just
Prince of
forget
Egypt is
everything
the
we've already
greatest film of
prepared.
all time.
Yeah.
Okay, no. Anyway, Christian music, it's just ingrained into my brain on the deepest level. You know, my earliest memories are listening to Christian music, you know, in our kitchen or in the car. You know, my parents both really, really love music. And so I listened to Christian music for my whole life. You know, my parents, when I was really young, were both really into like Stephen Curtis Chapman and Amy Grant and the Katinas. And interestingly enough, neither of them were super into Michael W. Smith. But personally, I have a soft spot for Smitty. Like, you can't tell me that Above All does not just smack. Okay, that song is amazing, and I will hear nothing else. Um, and then as I got a little bit older, but I mean, I guess I was still pretty young. I was probably only like 5 or 6. I thought I was like super edgy and cool, so I was really into Zoe Girl and Super Chick and Barlow Girl and Reliant K when I
Hey,
was like 6 years old.
Reliant K is a great band, and I still listen to them to this day, so no judgment there.
Well, because Matt Thiessen is just a phenomenal singer and a great vocalist, and that was actually cool. A couple years ago, Tom and I went to Portland together to see Owl City in concert, and Matt Thiessen actually opened up for Owl City. And so we actually got to
that's
hear him
awesome.
sing live. So we didn't see Reliant K, but we did see Matt Thiessen. But yeah, Christian music is just ingrained in my brain. It's been through my whole life. You know, like Tom pointed out, our mom is super into gospel music, like Mary Mary, Kirk Franklin, Fred Hammond. And during my really, really early formative years, my dad was going through a phase where he was super into Christian bluegrass music.
Oh man.
So I have a real soft spot for that as well. And then honestly, just those kind of early 2000s CCM, like typical bands that people make fun of, I love. Like Third Day, Mercy Me. I will go to town listening to Casting Crowns. I will literally just sing until I can sing no more to Casting Crowns, okay? Make fun of me. I don't care. I don't even care. Just late 90s, early 2000s CCM and worship music. Like Travis Cottrell makes my life. Travis Cottrell is everything to me. I will listen to his music and listen to, especially his album Unashamed Love, and just sit there and be like, Jesus is so good. I love God. Oh my goodness. Like, just because his music is just amazing. And I would have to say my favorite genre of Christian music is probably VeggieTales.
Oh yeah. That's fire.
Yo, Silly Songs with Larry is kind of a banger, I won't lie.
Where's the lie though?
Kidding, but not kidding. I do love VeggieTales, but no, not my favorite genre of Christian music. Honestly, I don't know if it's because it's the music that I was exposed to at a young age or if it's just because of my personal tastes, but I genuinely enjoy listening to late 90s, early 2000s CCM worship music. Like you cannot tell me that Awesome God and Sometimes by Step by Rich Mullins are not bangers. You cannot tell me that Days of Elijah by Twyla Paris is not a straight banger. I can't hear of it. I can't receive it. I don't accept it. I don't let that negativity into my life because that's who I am. And honestly, I don't super love most of the kind of newer contemporary worship music. Like I'm not really into Jesus Culture or Elevation or the new stuff that Hillsong puts out. I mean,
Everything I listed earlier.
in terms of new stuff, the main artists that I enjoy that are actually putting out new music right now would be For King and Country and Phil Wickham. I'm really
I forgot about him. Oh.
Phil Wickham is really good. That's another one of the artists that Tom and I will listen to together in the car. But that I love it. I'm sorry. Everybody's gonna make fun of me because everybody talks about like all that cheesy early 2000s 90s Christian music, but it speaks to me. And I mean, especially Christian music that's like pre 2010 has really been the soundtrack of my life. It's been what I've listened to or what's been on during my life, like so many conversations in the car or cooking in the kitchen or just going about my life, doing homework. That's what was playing. And so that type of music really has a place in my heart and in my life.
This is where Maddie and I differ because when we're in the car together, oftentimes she'll try to play the late 90s, early 2000s CCM. And I got so I got so sick of it after listening to it for so long that I just called it trash, right? So now every time I get into the car with her, I say, "Don't play trash," and she knows exactly what that means. It means don't play late 90s to early 2000 CCM.
I
It
was
also
expecting you to
means
say
don't
like
play VeggieTales.
I was expecting you to say like as soon as it happens, I just want to just start driving into a ditch. Just
Honestly,
end it.
I've contemplated it a couple times. There's been a few
So like
times.
I will say on the note of VeggieTales, so I just thought like, what if I could take the stems, like the original parts of a VeggieTales song and make it like really trap or like make it like really modern rap. And I will say I did find the acapella stem, so I could definitely produce a beat to go under it, and that might have to happen because, I mean, what better thing to do during Corona than
that
make like
that will
modern
happen.
like super fire VeggieTales. Yeah, just stay tuned for that, you guys.
That sounds amazing, Jordan. I love that. Maddie and I will rock to that in the car together gladly.
Yeah, it's on the podcast, so now I have to do it, right?
Yep.
It's written.
100%. Well, I think that all of us have definitely had very different experiences with Christian music, and we each have different things that we enjoy and that we like. But why don't we talk about specifically current Christian music? So the stuff that's kind of coming out and is in the works today. What do we think they're getting right and what do we think they're getting wrong? So let's start off. What do we think that Christian music coming out today is getting right?
Getting right. Well, I generally go towards the more negative side of things. I feel like I had a lot more notes on that, but I will say one thing that Christian music as a whole, and I'm talking CCM, rap metal, all of that, or actually probably more particularly that, is that they do a lot to reach the lost. Specifically the rap and metal genres and the more like alternative style Christian music. Some of my favorite bands actually make a habit of touring with secular groups, so that they're like right in the thick of it. Like that band I talked about called Impending Doom. They're a very extreme sounding band, and they tour with other bands that are that way, but they're not Christian. And honestly, there's so much like hatred and hurt and just pain in some of those bands in that audience that I find it amazing that they decided to kind of like secretly like, hey, we sound like them, so we're just gonna sneak our message in there of hope. And I love that for the alternative bands. And I can't really necessarily say that as much with CCM, but I have seen some CCM bands or artists that make it on Ellen or they make it into the mainstream, and I think that's awesome, because I would love to see more of an integration there, to where we have everybody listening to these positive messages of hope.
100%. I think that there are a couple things that the music that's coming out right now is getting right. I would say that Christian music that's coming out right now, a lot of it, and I obviously you can't speak for everything that's coming out, but I would say a good portion of it does a really good job of making people feel things. It does a good job of evoking emotion. And I think that with all music, that's important, regardless of genre. And I would say that not all of it, definitely not all of it, but I do think that a good portion is also pretty strong lyrically. I wouldn't really say the same musically, but I would say that I think that a lot of the lyrics, even in songs that you might say, this is kind of an annoying song, you might write the lyrics down and say, oh, but the lyrics are actually, really good. And I do think
Yeah.
that the musicianship has improved over the years. You look at some of these artists and things that it came out in the early 90s and you're like, yeah, they would never be on the Christian radio now because their voices or their ability to play instruments is just not at the same caliber. Obviously, a lot of the Christian musicians today that are coming out of CCM aren't necessarily as good as what's coming out of the secular music space. But I will say, I think the musicianship has improved a lot. I think in general, the lyrics are getting uh, pretty strong. And I think that they do an excellent job of really evoking emotion, which I think is important.
Yeah, I think some of the songs really have beautiful lyrics and are just simply incredible. Like I know it's basic, but Oceans by Hillsong, I mean, that
Oh
has a
man, yeah.
beautiful chorus, amazing
Yeah.
chorus. But what it seems like to me with the CCM, and I'll go specifically with the worship scene, like what we listen to in church, I think it's very repetitive. And what it feels like to me is that the entire genre of CCM worship is like in a box. And
Mm.
there's it feels like there's only so much that they're taking from out of, and it there doesn't feel like there's a lot of creativity and outside the box thinking in the genre.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like they're very just strict on, we go at this tempo, we play only in 4/4. There's no any
In these certain keys, right?
yeah, there's no variance. There's no nothing. We do basic drum fills. We do basic bass lines. There's nothing really like too instrumental impressive about it. So that's what I would say. I think that the worship genre specifically is very just stuck in a rut and stuck in the mud and not really thinking too much uh, outside the box.
Yeah,
Right.
in speaking of the bad side of things, on the note of worship bands, I feel like some have had the habit of, and it's gonna sound kind of weird, but of replacing talent with spiritualism. And what I mean by that is, it's like we allow ourselves to do like a so-so job on our instruments just because we're being emotional on stage, or um we're like having what looks like an overly spiritual experience, and then we seem to just let it go. I think of, for example, Bethel, which they are amazing,
Hmm.
but like somebody who goes and they're very spiritual and emotion based. I think it could be easy for worship bands to kind of just get caught in the moment a little too much, and then you realize it's like, well, like I've experienced this in myself. Like if I'm gonna play some on a Sunday, I don't practice as much as I should, and it's like, why, I need to work on my actual skills and hone that, and not just, if I'm making sense. I know that sounds a little crazy,
Hmm.
because like spiritualism isn't bad, but I do definitely agree that they are stuck in a rut in terms of worship music in particular.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that is really important, and this is one of the things that I actually had kind of on my what are we getting wrong list, is that we're really convoluting Christian music and worship music. And I think that that has ended up with some really kind of junky stuff on both sides, because Christian music does not have to be worship music, quote unquote, right? Like
Right? Yeah.
Christian, why is it that you can listen to the Christian radio and without words know that it's a Christian radio station, right? Like before they've even sung anything, you're like, oh, this is a Christian song. Why is that? And so I think that we need to recognize that there's a differentiation, because personally, from what I see from the scriptures and what I see just doctrinally, I think that the music that is actually sung in church should be very simple. It should be easy to sing, easy to follow. It shouldn't be a performance. You shouldn't have people up there singing in crazy keys and showing off all of their amazing talents and skills. It should be about congregational singing, people all singing together, worshiping the Lord, singing songs, hymns, and spiritual songs, as the Bible verse goes. And I think that Christian music should just be any music of any genre that is glorifying God in its lyrics. And so I think in
Yeah.
that case, why is it just quote unquote CCM? Why does it have to be worship music? Why can't there be other types of music that are Christian music? I mean, it's weird that you listen to a Christian music station and it's basically all the same genre.
Right. And speaking of genres within there, um, as much as I love Christian hip hop, Christian rap, I have found that a lot of the, let's say, like, not top tier, so like ones that aren't quite as big as like NF, Lecrae, Andy Mineo, um, I see this trend where a lot of their lyrics ends up being like super corny and irrelevant stuff. And I can't tell you, and again, it might sound a little bad, I can't tell you like how tired I am of hearing rappers preach, just like literally just preach the words of John 3:16 or the gospel, and that's it. Where they talk about, they're like, oh, I'm evangelizing, and I'm doing this. I'm like, well, how about you do what every other genre is doing and talk about your own experiences, talk about your pains, your struggles, the fact that you're human. And
Right.
I feel like, and I think that goes beyond rap. That's just my own, like, I just have an issue with that. But the thing of like, let's take what we're doing. Yes, it's great that we're glorifying God with some of this, like, let's call it surface level stuff, but let's go deeper. Let's show our humanity also and our pain in it. And that's why I love, like, this Lecrae's latest album, and I love NF and things like that, because they're not afraid to go dark, and they're not afraid to go beyond just telling people that God loves them. And I know that sounds a little bit controversial, but I feel like there's a lot more that could be said if we have a platform.
Well, look at like Andy Mineo's song "Shame"
Right?
from
Yeah.
2018, where he talks about his um, all of the addictions that he had and the struggles, the worldly struggles that he had, and just being so open about it. And it's really, for me, I love when artists are able to open up, just like NF's last album, where the entire album is him being open about his mental health.
Yeah.
And I'm with you, Jordan. I love when artists do that. I really appreciate it.
Well, I think that part of the reason that artists don't do that is because we have confused worship music and Christian music. Because worship music should be, it should be doctrinal, it should be directing worship to God, encouraging one another. Whereas music that's just Christian music is a space for essentially sharing your testimony, talking about things that are going on in your life, just like any other type of music, but just from a perspective that comes from a biblical worldview as opposed to a secular one, where you're not glorifying sex and drugs and immorality, but instead you're
Right.
glorifying godly things. And you can do that while still being real and raw about the things that are going on in your life. I mean, read the book of Psalms. Like, if you've read Psalm 51, that's all you need to know about that.
Absolutely. And so, um, going a little deeper, so, on the practical side of things, how do we think Christian music can change for the better? Tom, you had an interesting idea on this, and I'd love to open it up with what you have to say.
So about maybe a year ago, I I was driving with my sister in the car, and we were listening to some Christian music, and this idea just popped in my head just randomly, and I've kind of just stuck with it, and this is how I think uh, Christian music should go towards. And I turned to my sister and I said, "Why don't we have more like people like Hillsong or Jesus Culture, where they we have things like Hillsong metal and Hillsong R&B, Hillsong hip hop, where we have all these different subgenres where we're able to glorify God and we're able to reach out to new people and new communities, but and because like with the basic CCM worship setting, I know plenty of people who are not Christians and are just repulsed and just kind of disgusted by the way that the music
Yeah.
sounds. And that's just not for them. They're not at the spiritual level where they can truly like kind of understand the lyrics and kind of what's going on yet. So for me, what I would personally would have, if you have someone, a young dude, and he's really into hip hop or whatever, you can have these subgenres of music where you can really reach out to them. Kind of like what bigger artists are doing with, like, I mean, like what Impending Doom is doing. what artists, big artists are doing. So that's what I think. What Christian music should move more towards, more of outreaching. But that's my own personal opinion.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting you say that because I'm thinking of Hillsong in particular. Obviously, they're the Christian music giant, right? I
Yep.
mean,
That's why I picked
Hillsong
them.
is like practically a household name. And when you say this, I see how Hillsong technically they have Hillsong, they have Hillsong worship, and then they have Hillsong Young and Free, just to name a few. I think they have a kids one too. And so I I see the concept that could already work there, but when I'm listing off these, like I cannot begin to tell you the difference between Hillsong worship and just Hillsong, for one thing. And then Hillsong Young and Free is just like, okay, I get that. That's your youth group band. Like you got a little more electronic stuff there.
Yep.
Which I will say I like this stuff. It's fun. But I feel like they're almost trying to do what you're talking about, Tom, but they're still so like narrowly focused on like they in theory they've got the what am I trying to say? They have the idea, right? But they're they're just three of the same name or three of the same thing under different names.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, one thing that I think we can do to make Christian music for the better, and I think that all three of us are kind of saying the same thing in a different way, is expanding into other areas, not all sounding the same.
Yeah.
Because we want Christian music to be able to reach as many people as possible because it's been shown that Christian music really is an evangelistic tool. I mean, Christian radio has done amazing things for the kingdom of God. There have been countless souls that have been saved, people that have, been taken off from the edge of the cliff of suicide and depression and all these things from just happening to turn on Christian radio at the right time. So Christian radio is incredibly powerful and Christian music is incredibly powerful. And I think that we're not condemning anything that they're doing or saying, wow, it's so terrible and so horrible, but we're saying, how can we make it better? And I think for
Absolutely.
me, I talked about it earlier, I'll talk about it again, making that differentiation between worship music and Christian music, because I think Christian music, as a listener, you're being sung at. You're listening. You're not an active participant. You're being entertained, you're being encouraged, you're being edified, but you're not actually participating with that group. It's not an experience that is happening in real time. And in that case, I think it can be any genre. I think it can deal with any number of life's issues. I think that we should be striving for complete and utter excellence and craftsmanship in terms of what types of instruments are we using and what type of sound equipment are we using and, how are we training our voices to be the best and what kind of riffs are we doing and all this kind of stuff. I think that that's great. And I think that for Christian music where we're being sung at, I think that should really be a big focus. But I think that for worship music, we have to recognize that worship music should not be being sung at. It should be singing with. We're active participants. We're worshiping as a congregation as a way of admonishing one another and as a way of preparing our minds and hearts for receiving the message of, the gospel and listening to the word as preached by the pastor later on in the service or in the home group or what have you. So I think that worship music should be simple. It should be easy to sing. It should be easy to follow. It should make sense melodically. It should be strong theologically. It shouldn't just be, oh, I had a bad life and now I have a good life. There should be good doctrine in there. It shouldn't
Yeah.
be the pop star stuff. You shouldn't have people up there with their microphones doing all of these insane riffs and trying to see who can do the craziest guitar lick and all of these things. It should be about people coming together and participating. And so I think there has to be that differentiation there because my feelings on what's going to make Christian music better are very different than my feelings on what I think is going to make worship music better.
Maddie, I'm on the same page with you on the CCM and worship difference. I think CCM people or artists need to realize that you're not making worship music, as you were saying, Maddie, and for our worship leaders, really stop trying to use it for worship so much. And I'm not saying that there isn't a time to maybe throw in a song from a CCM artist that you love and it like really fits the theme of the sermon or the, whatever have you. But I feel like there's way too many worship leaders that are just taking performance based songs and doing them. And that's rich coming from me. Like I said, I love production and I love a good performance. But at the same time, it can be really awkward when the crowd is, or the crowd, the audience, congregation, whatever you want to call it, when they're just kind of sitting there and just taking it in. And
Right.
it's not for like a special thing. Like it's not like a Christmas or an Easter production where that's kind of understood to be that way.
Right.
But
It's not a presentational.
yeah, and so, and on the note of worship on there too, I think that we really, and this is more on the local level, we need to raise the bar on musicianship. I talked about this a little bit before, but you see some of the bigger churches, they know, like they practice their stuff enough, they know what they're playing, they've got it memorized and all that. Where you see really 80% of churches under whatever size, like all, the average size church, everyone has chord sheets, and they're just kind of following along and they have music stands. And I'm not saying that that's bad if you don't know the stuff and you need that help. But what I am assuming, because I'm guilty of it, is you're not taking your musicianship seriously enough and actually learning the songs. You're just kind of showing up and saying, "Oh, I'm gonna put in my effort for the day." And so I think we could really benefit from raising the bar there, and going away from the mainstream, going into rap. I think rappers should take the note from other CCM stuff, and learn to write about more, like I said, more than just the basic gospel. There's some great CCM stuff that covers a wide range of stuff. Like we talked about, their lyrics are amazing. But I can't tell you how many times I've gone to like a local outreach, for example, or somewhere with like a local Christian rapper, and I just kind of shake my head at their songs because they're all so just dry and bland and basic, and they're just talking about that Jesus loves you, and they're just rhyming it with different words. And I'm not trying to be so hard, but like, man, you can do so much better. And like get your head out, like out of the, this is going to sound really bad. Get your head out of the pages of the Bible and actually talk about how it affects you, how God has affected you in your life, instead of just preaching something basic, and I know I'm repeating myself there, but it is really a big bother to me seeing that. And so honestly, if I put it basically at that point, you guys listen to Lecrae, take note, and repeat, just or replicate.
Exactly.
Just do that.
Yeah.
My man is retiring on the top. He's got it figured out.
I think in terms of, talking about preaching about more than just the quote unquote gospel, I think the biggest thing is realizing that preaching the gospel is not as simple as just saying the facts of the gospel, right? It's not as simple as just because to me, when you are singing about what God has done for you, you are sharing the gospel. You're sharing your testimony of the gospel, right? And the New Testament is filled with just verses and passages talking about the power of our testimony. And so I think that's really important, that you're not saying don't preach the gospel. You're saying you should be preaching the gospel in a variety of ways, because some people, they're going to hear the factual essence of the gospel and they're going to be like, okay, 1 + 2 = 3. That makes perfect sense to me. I'm going to be a Christian now. But somebody else, it's going to be hearing that person's testimony that they're going to be like, oh, that's the gospel. Wow, I really need to be a Christian because I need what that person has, right? So it's not don't preach the gospel, it's preach the gospel in different ways. And
exactly
the same with the what you were saying about keep your head out of the pages of the Bible. I personally would not say it that way. I know
that's a little rough way to say it.
You're a little bit more on the brash side on that. But I think it really is about, okay, here's the scripture, and now here's how the scripture actually impacts my life, your life, random Joe Schmo's life. You know what I'm saying? So it's not don't preach or sing about the scripture, but it's let's talk about kind of that practical application piece, because obviously, you know, for a Christian artist, even if you're not a worship artist, you know, just talking about the CCM stuff, the Bible should be at the core of everything you do, because Christian music should just simply be music created within the framework of a biblical worldview.
100%. You know, and I think when I look back at to kind of refine what I'm saying there, it's more so, you know, I see, not literally, of course, but it's like they're just copy and pasting. Let's pull up the Bible, let's pull up what it's saying and just rap it over a beat or sing it over a track, without actually internalizing what you're saying. Because if you were internalizing what you're saying, then you wouldn't be saying it that way. You know, like we look about like Andy Mineo, who he has a song called "I Ain't Done." He's like, you know, I'm not done with my life. God has more for me. Or, you know, when rappers talk about, you know, having a confidence because they know that God, like Andy Mineo again, he's like, some say I'm cocky, but I know that God got me. And like, that's a really clever way to talk about how you have the power of God behind you, you know? And that's what I'm talking about. Let's get some more of that out there.
Well, singing scripture is a really powerful thing to do for worship music, but it gets to a point where it's very like for CCM, where it seems like you're just kind of, you know what I mean? When it's worship music, you're saying, okay, the word of God is living and powerful and active, and this is how we're choosing to worship the Lord, by the recitation of his word, which nothing is more powerful than his word. But then sometimes with some types of CCM music or Christian rap or things like that, it seems that they're not doing it for that reason. They're doing it because they're like, man, I've got no more creativity left in me, and I can't come up with any idea. So let me just open up my Bible to a random passage and see if this helps.
Okay, you know, and we could definitely talk about this for hours and hours and hours more. But to wrap it up, you know, I'm thinking about Lecrae again, and you know, he said in his interview, and I know I'm repeating myself, but I really loved it, that it's time to make a way for new artists to rise up. And I really do love that. And, you know, he's not the only one. I've seen this play out with one of my favorite metal bands called For Today. They retired a few years ago, and it allowed a number of really amazing Christian metal bands to rise up that would have, I think, otherwise been stuck in the shadows. And so, you know, with that, I want to encourage artists to strive for that same level of connection to God that like Lecrae and For Today have shown, in the fact that they were connected enough to know like, hey, it's time to quit. And the thing with that is, I'm calling it a connection to God because I feel like you can get so successful. You're like, I just want to keep riding this wave until I burn out. And they had the wisdom that only comes from a relationship with the Lord, a close relationship. They had the wisdom to call it good, to call it a day. And so I think, you know, they're really an example for leaders in general to follow. You know, let us never grow stagnant, but instead strive for a greater, deeper connection with our Creator.
Yeah, I think that is amazing advice. I completely agree with that. I would say for me, the advice that I want to leave everyone with is, firstly, for those of us that may be just listeners, be intentional about what you're listening to, and what you're supporting, because it, you know, so much of it really has to do with the amount of stuff that we listen to, and what we're paying for is what increases in popularity. And so support those indie bands or those groups that may not be super popular, but that you think are putting out really phenomenal content. The more that you support them, the more that they're going to come into the public eye, and the more that we can really shift the way that we think about Christian music. For the people out there that are creating CCM, I would say strive to do everything with excellence, strive to do everything for the glory of God, strive to really be creative because God created us to be creative, strive to become more excellent in your musicianship, and really look at what you can do to create music that's going to reach the greatest amount of people for the kingdom of God. And for those of us more on my end of the spectrum, more on the worship side of things, I would say, guys, really just focus on the simple truths of the gospel. Focus on that doctrine, those important theological truths. Remember that you're not a performer. You're not an entertainer. Maybe you could be one day. Your job is to lead people into the presence of God through worship, which means that we're all singing together. It's a group effort. So let's work on making things easier and more accessible. And I really want to leave you guys with a verse, a passage that's one of my absolute favorite Bible verses, which is Colossians 3:16 through 17, which says, "Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to God. And whatever you do in word or in deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him."
And what I just like to leave on the podcast is just, especially for upcoming artists, I just encourage you to not be satisfied with the status quo. Don't be stagnant in your ways. Really try to be creative, pray to God, and try to figure out ways that you could try to reach more people in a broader spectrum to lead more people to the kingdom. Because that's ultimately, at the end of the day, our goal as Christians. We're to evangelize to the ends of the world, you know? So that's really what I think with Christian music. The goal is to outreach to more people, not just to stay within our own comfort zone. So, yeah, and I just like to thank you two, Jordan and Maddie, for having me on today. It was a pleasure of mine. I really enjoyed it.
Oh,
Yeah,
man, thank you for
you so much for
coming
being
on.
here. It was so exciting to have our first guest, and I'm super glad that it was you, Tom, and I'm really glad that we're able to talk about a topic that's really near and dear to all three of our hearts. You know, we all love music, and, you know, we're all involved in music in some way, so I'm really glad that you could be on here today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've been trying. Hey, I told you, Maddie, I was trying to be the first guest on your show, and I finally pushed myself hard enough. And look, here I am, first guest on Church Vibes.
Boom,
You
did
gotta
it.
have
I
goals.
did it. I did it.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we can't just go on talking forever, as enjoyable as that might be. So with that, it's going to be time to say goodbye. So until next week, all you out there, abide in Christ, love your neighbor, and never stop having the tough conversations.
We love you guys.
Peace.
Thanks for tuning into the Church Vibes podcast with Jordan and Maddie. If you enjoyed this week's episode, we'd love for you to share it with your friends and leave us a review. For additional content and to stay updated on all the latest and greatest, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Talk Church Vibes. That's at Talk Church Vibes. See you next time.